I'm Jay Newstrom. I work at Buildertrend, as said earlier. Going to talk about runtime permissions. Little agenda. Going to show you basically how you install an Android app, as if none of you have ever done this. Going to show you as Lollipop, which is before the runtime permissions changes, and then I'm going to show you after, which is Marshmallow with the runtime permissions changes. Then we'll go into how do you update your app. So you're ready to go to Marshmallow and use these new runtime permissions. How do you do it? Then show you a couple gotchas that I've read about, I've seen myself, and stuff like that. And then how I've organized my code to deal with these new changes and permissions and how to deal with them at runtime. So go ahead and get started off. This is a Lollipop device. When you go to the Play Store, you search for Buildertrend, and you're ready to install the app. And you see, wow, what are these people asking for my identity, my contacts, my location, my photos, files, and my camera? Like, what are they going to do to me? A problem that's annoyed me as a user, I don't trust these people, right? Like, what are you going to do with these? And Buildertrend, we have an app that uses a lot of different dangerous permissions, as we'll learn later. And we have things like a time clock where you can use your GPS location to say, hey boss, I was at this job site when I clocked in. Or you can upload pictures of a new remodel to Buildertrend to share with a homeowner. So we do use a lot of these things, and like messages, we can tie in your contacts so that you can send an email to someone who's in your phone but maybe not in Buildertrend. So we use these things, and we use them in a good way, and we try to treat your data nicely. We don't take your contacts and go send them off to anybody else to get spam email or anything like that. We only use them when the user asks for them, which made this transition a little easier. So back on the Lollipop device, we're ready to clock in. We want to tag the location, and you'll see that it just works. No changes needed. Basically, when you said install the app, I'm okay with you using all these permissions. Everything just works, good to go. So from a developer standpoint, this is great. Like, if you need a permission, you get it. From a user standpoint, that means we could be requesting your location whenever we want, not necessarily just at the time when you want to clock in. So these things changed in Marshmallow. Here's basically the first app that you install that does support Android 6.0 on a Marshmallow device. This is the dialog you'll see. So it says, apps built for Android 6.0 will ask for your permission once you start using them. So what this means is, when we go to upload your pictures, we ask if we can use your files that are on your device to upload them, as well as things in your camera. Same thing with when you're clocking in. We don't show or use this location API until you're in the time clock screen and we're ready to do so. So basically what this says is your location permission is denied. So we can't actually start getting your location until you've said allow or deny. Well, just allow, because if we try to access that API when you say deny, the app will actually crash. Another Marshmallow change, you can have an app that was not designed for runtime permissions, and you can deny those permissions from that app. So say I really don't want Kindle to use my phone. Like, what do they need that for? I don't know, and I'm not going to use Kindle to use my phone. So I'm going to deny that. And this dialog pops up and says, this app was designed for an older version of Android. Denying permissions may cause it to no longer function as intended. So if you don't update your app, you will potentially get crashes for trying to access things that the user doesn't want you to do. So a couple benefits of using this new model, just from like a standard user perspective. App updates. Before, if you added a new permission and said, users go update my app, if you add the permission, automatic updates don't work. They get queued until the user goes into that update update screen and sees those apps and manually says update, accept the new permissions. Also, the thing with user trust, so as I was talking about, we don't use your location for anything but clocking in or when you expect us to use it. But that's not saying that somebody malicious can't install an app on your device and track everywhere you go. And same thing with control. So if you are like, I don't care, this app uses my location, I want the battery savings of not using location, I can deny that permission, and that app is not allowed to use location. So, you know, you get a couple of benefits for whatever that permission is that you're using. So, Marshmallow. They've separated permissions. You have normal permissions, which Google deems as okay, and dangerous permissions, which Google says this potentially has user data, they may not want to share this. So I put a couple examples up here. This is definitely not an exhaustive list. Some things that Google declares normal is internet. So now if your app wants to access the internet, you don't have to ask the user. You just get internet permission. You don't have to declare it in your manifest if you're targeting Marshmallow and above. But you just get those things for free, which is really, really cool. Every app pretty much has internet permission, whether it's for Crashlytics, uploading your crash reports, analytics, tracking what you do, or accessing a backend. So the difference here is with something like internet, on iOS you can say which apps can use 3G, 4G. I don't think you can do that on Android. I have yet to find a way. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong there. So you can't necessarily control everything as a user, just the dangerous permissions. So here's the 9 groups that Google has come up with. I'll let you take a minute to look those over. And so you may, if you're familiar with Android, what we've done previously is declare permissions in the manifest. And some of those permissions are read calendar, write calendar, which now all bubble up into the calendar permission group. Same thing with contacts. There's 3 in this case, read, write, and get contacts. So some of them are grouped as you'd expect, like calendar, and some have an extra 1 or 2 thrown in there, such as get accounts. And again, both of these are dangerous permissions for permission groups for calendar and contacts. So how do you go about upgrading your app? I'm not going to go into a whole lot of technical detail. There's some great resources on how to do it. It's fairly easy. The first thing you do is in your build.gradle, if that's where you specify your target SDK version, you set that to API version 23, which is Marshmallow. The other thing you will more than likely want to do is use the support v4 library. This is the latest version as of now. It gives you a couple things, which I will show when I give a little bit of a high-level overview of the code. And the big one here is ask before using dangerous permissions. So if you're going to access the user's files, the user's camera, GPS, whatever, you have to ask permission before you actually call those APIs, otherwise your app will crash. The cool thing is no manifest changes. So if you want to maintain backwards compatibility, you still declare all those same permissions that you were using in your manifest, and they just stay, and that works for old versions of Android. And basically, if you're only targeting API 23 and above, Marshmallow, you don't have to specify any permissions in your manifest. You just ask for those at runtime, and things work as you'd expect.
So, just say internet, is that if you don't specify it in the manifest, and you can't be backwards compatible, or would it, because it's an automatic one now in Marshmallow, is it backwards compatible?
Right, so if you need to maintain backwards compatibility support, you have to specify
Okay,
those
so it doesn't
in
do
your
that for you.
manifest.
I thought I heard that you have to define it in your manifest even if you're supporting 23 plus.
I could be wrong.
Because I've heard a podcast that said from the Google developers that for some reason you need it. I don't remember why. I
Gotcha.
think they use it to analyze your application to see what are you using, something like that.
Gotcha.
I think you need it.
I could be wrong. I haven't tested that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in theory, you don't have to change your manifest, and you don't have to. There's actually another API in the manifest. So, if you want to maintain backwards compatibility and you want all of those old users to constantly upgrade, you can specify. I think you are right because there's a new API for permission Marshmallow only. I forget the exact syntax of that.
Oh yeah.
But if you want to ask for permission, you can do that Marshmallow forward without affecting old users. So this is the part where you're at runtime, you're ready to ask the user for permission. What do? Context has a method on it for, I think it's check self permission or something like this. But it's been there for a long time, so you can just use it. But context compat has a method to do it as well, and that has a couple niceties. It specifies a couple things for you rather than having to do it everywhere. So the first thing you would do is you'd say, do I already have this permission? So as an example, you could pass into this method manifest.permissions.readCalendar. And at that point, it knows to go to the permission group of calendar. And from that point, you can say, yep, I have permission, go ahead and call the APIs that I need to. If not, there's another method that you should check, and that's on activity compat, and that is should show request permission rationale. And basically what that does is that allows you as a developer to show, hey, I really want this permission for, say, photos, and you can say to the user, this is why I need it. So you can display a dialog explaining that. And if they say, okay, I guess I'll add that now, then you can request the permission with this next thing here, which is activity compat request permissions. So the Android M preview SDK stuff changed the way this method returns. And the Buildertrend app probably has a bug in it because of that. So this should not return true the first time you call it. So you'll have to request permission the first time. And then basically what this request permissions method does is it allows you, it actually goes into the system and shows a dialog. So that's what I showed at the beginning. I can pop back to that if you want. So that's this dialog here. It says allow Buildertrend to do whatever, and you'll get a callback into that here on when you override on request permission result in your activity. So that'll tell you if the user approved or declined it from that dialog. So there's a bunch of gotchas. There's been a ton of blog posts and a lot of stuff online about it, and I have a couple links at the end that if you're interested in some of those, you can go look there. But sharing is a big one, and I don't know how many people accept intents into your app, or even if you're like sending an intent to grab a photo and bringing it back, a lot of people assume that's an external file. And while that worked great before Marshmallow, if the user has not granted that permission, your app will crash. So if you're using intents to grab files, if you're using intents to start your app, you'll definitely want to look into that and make sure that you have the permissions before you're actually doing something with it. And there was a bunch of posts for broadcast receivers and stuff like that as well. Another thing to be sure to look at is when permission is denied. So that could be, the user's used your app for 100 times and they just don't care about the permission. And The location is just denied, and I'll pop back to the screenshot here. Wrong one. So basically what we do is we just assume permission denied, and if we want to ask for it, say for the first time, we show them this. But if they say deny, never ask again, this is just the screen they'll see every time. And for location in our clock in feature, it's not a big deal. But say something like uploading a photo, every time they go into that screen, you're going to have to show something, and you're not supposed to show this dialog every time. So far, Google has not blocked you from showing this dialog every time, which is kind of interesting. But yeah. So definitely something to look into. Go ahead.
What do you think, instead of doing that, what would you do if you had to?
So I'll show you basically one of the earlier screenshots again. So this is what our upload photo screen looks like when permission is denied. Behind this, there's just a little piece of text right here that says photo permission denied, or something like that. And in this case, I don't know what else we could do. That's where
the settings or something. I think that's what they recommend.
But with Android, it's different than iOS. You can show this dialog again if the user presses a button in your app, say. So you don't have to take them to settings to do this. You can request it right in your app.
Oh, yeah.
So you could even have a button there instead of a text view and just say, when they click on this, ask for their permission again.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's a little frustrating in that sense, and how you handle it. And that's definitely a gotcha, and I wouldn't say I've solved it well. So another one is knowing where your dangerous permissions are used. And Brandon actually found one the other day. We were trying to access the file system, and before we could have just assumed we had permission to do so, but now we can't. So you have to know where you're using those dangerous APIs, as well as showing the right stuff around it and planning around it. So you got to be careful there. One thing that I ran into, we support back to Android 4.0, and there's one of the files or photos permissions isn't a thing back on that version. So when you go to that screen, it always says permission denied. It never asks the user, it never accepts it. So what should we do? We should probably just assume permission is granted if the API level is less than 23, but we were actually checking that context method for check self permission every time. And it worked for every case except for versions that didn't have that permission. So if I asked if I had internet permission, it would return true, no matter what API version, because that's been there for more than we support. And same thing for location. That's been there for more than we support. But there was at least one where it would just say permission denied because we weren't checking that it was less than API 23 and returning true. So what if you have a required permission? Say an app like Snapchat. The sole purpose of their app is to use your camera. What do you do in that case? Well, it's not like you can go to a section of your app and then ask for permissions like we do, because it's just not an option. They have one purpose. So in the case of Snapchat, they would basically just have to say, right when the user launches the app, give me permission. And if they deny it, they can't really do a whole lot there. Maybe you can go view your friends' snaps, but there's just not a good way around it. And this has been an issue on iOS for a long time as well. And there's really not a good answer for how to solve this permission denied stuff. So in the builder trim code base, kind of the approach we've taken is assume permission's been denied when you're building up the view hierarchy. So the first time through, if it's a different view state, just put it in that view state. If there's one button like the location that says you can't do it, then just show it. Then we ask for permission, and we do this on API 23, and we do this on every API version that we support. So we're always asking for this permission. That way it's just one code path. And once it's approved, which is right away on API 21 or whatever before Marshmallow, or it could be asynchronous if you're on Marshmallow. So we ask for the permission, and then once we've received the AOK, we go ahead and call those operations. So if you want to get a jump start on the location API, you can't do that until the user says it's okay to do that. So it's something that you have to be at least cognizant of and ready to handle. So there's a ton of information on lots of this stuff. I have code with me if you guys are interested in seeing some of that. I know I just showed some high-level stuff, but there's really good developer stuff on Android. They have kind of the permissions groups and stuff like that in the first link. The second link there is how to do the check self-permission, show request rationale, all that stuff. And I linked a couple blogs as well on some interesting things where runtime permissions were causing issues, and basically another one that's how do you do runtime permissions. So I would definitely suggest the second link there if you're trying to do this in your own app. It gives you a pretty simple and straightforward way of going about doing that. Yeah, so that's all I had.
Are those links online anywhere?
I will post the slides. How about that?
Cool.
Thanks. I'd be happy to answer questions if anybody has them.
Is the permission denied part of it the hardest? Because I feel like you'll hit some weird situations where, like, just say one screen needs to use 3 permissions and they say yes to 2 but no to 1. It's going to cause some weird use cases, and handling that it feels like it can just be a headache.
So I added this one in here, and this is an example. You can request multiple permissions at once, so you'll see the 1 of 2 and 2 of 2. And you can do that. And the way we treat it is if you deny 1, you deny all. So we treat it the same in that sense. This probably isn't really necessary. We don't use the camera, so we don't actually need that first one.
Right.
But yeah, that's the biggest thing I've run into is I haven't even found a good example of how to handle the permission denial.
You just shut it down, like, don't even try to make it kind of work. You just really, it's like, you can't use this.
Well, there's a couple cases, and for photos, like, we can't do anything. We could allow them to use intents, which is a good idea, actually. And that's a perfectly valid use case for these runtime permissions things, is you can use intents rather than give yourself the permission. And there's things like, one of these blog posts that I linked has an example of contacts. So if you want info on a contact, you can fire off an intent, and on activity result, get that information back. And you're automatically granted contacts read permission for that specific content URI. Okay. So you get permission for that one time just to read that contact, then you're done.
Sounds like a good way around it.
So you could, in theory, use an intent to get photos the same way or whatever you're wanting to do. For location, like I showed this page here, we allow them to clock in without a location, whether their GPS just isn't working or they don't want to give it to us, whatever. It's a valid use case. So we do give some outs in some cases, and some cases we don't. We probably should.
So for location, sorry, that's another question, but I know there's a method on their last known location does that not work, or is it just get the current location?
I don't know. I'm guessing all of the above.
I think last
Well,
known would be stored.
Well, I'm guessing they just throw an exception now in that method call because
Even if the location was found a while ago?
I'm guessing.
Okay. Okay.
You have something? You look like you're. What's up, man?
You said that developers should know where they are going to require dangerous permissions in your studio and warn you.
I'm sure there's some lint checks. I'm not sure how dummy-proof they are, though.
I think they said they're just trying to add them over time, but so some method calls will say check for this permission, but not everything.
Yeah. I think you can, there is like a support annotation type thing. It may or may not be a support annotation, but you can do this in library dependencies to tell consumers that, hey, if you call into this method, you're going to need this permission. So that's there as well.
So in the earlier slide you had it separated out into like the read contacts and write contacts.
Sure, this guy.
Yes. So do you have to request permission for both of those, or do they come as a pair?
Great question. I meant to mention this, but didn't. So you're right. If I request read calendar in one screen and they accept it, and 2 days later they come back and I need write calendar, I get it automatically if they've accepted read or write. They come as a package. Anybody else? Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jake.